So you want to learn more about epigenetics? Let's talk molecular biology. The scientific definition of epigenetics is the study of heritable phenotype changes that don't involve alterations in the DNA sequence. What does that mean exactly? It's the study of changes in how our genes are expressed. Our DNA itself doesn't change, but how, when, and how much we express it can change dramatically. So how do epigenetics work? Imagine your DNA like a long, twisted up string. For those of you old enough to remember telephone cords, think about one of those stretched out. This is like your DNA. On this string of DNA, there are typically different markers or tags added based on cues from our lifestyle or environment. Things like our stress management, diet, sleep schedule, and physical activity. One of the most common ways to tag the DNA is to add what's called a methyl group. You can think of this like dropping a pin on the string of DNA to mark a certain gene or set of genes. The function of these methyl groups is where epigenetics gets really interesting. Some types of methylation turn genes off or down, and sometimes this tagging turns genes on or up. After tags have been added to the DNA, special proteins scan up and down, and they read these tags. These scanning proteins are part of the system that then either ignores the gene and doesn't translate it, or begins the process of translating our genes into proteins. This is really the meat of epigenetics. Now, we're picturing the methyl tags on the DNA strand itself, but that's not all that happens. Imagine how a phone cord would look wrapped around a spool like thread. Similarly, in our bodies, DNA wraps around special proteins called histones. The DNA wraps around the histones, and then groups of histones wrap more and more tightly around each other. This is how DNA is typically stored, very condensed. Histones are also an important part of epigenetics because it turns out they can have their own tags. Some tags tell the histones to remain tightly bound, causing the DNA to be unavailable for translation. Others tell the histones to uncurl so that specific bits of DNA can be translated. Now, besides tagging different parts of the DNA or histones, the tags themselves can also be different. We mentioned methylation or methyl tags, but there's also acetylation, ubiquitination, citrullination, and phosphorylation. That's a lot of Asians. Depending on their pattern and where they're located, these tags all convey important messages to the translation machinery. At the heart of epigenetics is protein production. DNA is transcribed to RNA, which is then translated into protein. Different tags on the starting DNA lead to different proteins being created. We're made up of different types of proteins, some estimates as high as several billion types, according to researchers. It's our exact mixture of proteins that makes each of us unique. And it's our ability to rapidly change types and amounts of proteins made from our DNA that allow us to adapt to specific environments. For example, think of people who live at very high altitudes. Their epigenetic modifications allow them to live in conditions with less oxygen. Their protein content is different from someone living down at sea level. Or think about those who live in extreme cold or heat. Their epigenetic modifications encourage the translation of genes that adapt them to their environment and help them survive. Protein content is different for someone living in a temperate climate, and really any climate. So where do essential oils come in? Although we still have a lot of research to do, science suggests that even the things we smell can contribute to our epigenetic modifications. We know that smells are often closely associated with memory, which can bring positive feelings and lower stress when used purposefully. When used internally, essential oils can also act like many phytonutrients in healthy foods and encourage our bodies toward healthy states. Research suggests that these substances encourage epigenetic expression of traits that support the vitality of your body. Essential oils have been part of the human diet since the dawn of our species, We eat them in herbs, spices, fruits, vegetables. It makes sense that certain epigenetic traits have been passed down through the centuries. In 1868, biologist Thomas Huxley wrote about humankind as having a singular inward laboratory in which the molecules of life are in flux, being fueled by what we eat and changed by influences that scientists had yet to understand. Today, we know much more about DNA and the epigenetic influences that yield myriad proteins. But there's still so much to learn about this singular inward laboratory. The idea that we are just so much more than the genes with which we were born. The idea that we can shape who we are through conscious choices about nutrition, sleep, stress, exercise, and our environment. This idea is so empowering. Our nature, our DNA, is just one part of who we are. We can't blame our parents for everything. Our nurture, epigenetics, is really our ability to become our best selves. I, for one, am glad to have essential oils that create a soothing or uplifting environment, oils that help support good sleep, stress management, digestion, metabolism, and healthy immunity. I think the more science uncovers about DNA and epigenetic modifications, the more we will realize just how powerful essential oils can be.